Outside the restroom door, she heard muffled voices. Chairs scraping. The clinking of plates. Someone asked Harold where their waitress went. His voice came sharp and careless. She'll be back when she learns to follow rules. Her stomach knotted. Rules. She hadn't broken any rules. But she knew better than to argue logic with people who enjoyed control more than fairness. Meanwhile, miles away, James Brooks stepped out of a meeting at City Hall. He was tall, steady, and wore the kind of expression that made people straighten their backs when they passed him. As he lifted his phone from the table, he saw a message flashing from an unknown number. Something's wrong with Alana. She disappeared during her shift. Manager acting weird. Please check. He stared at the message for 3 seconds before the world sharpened around him. He grabbed his jacket, his keys, and didn't bother explaining to anyone where he was going. His driver rushed behind him, calling, "Sir, your next meeting." "It can wait," James said, his voice clipped. "My wife can't." The drive to Riverside Diner felt unbearably long. James tapped his foot repeatedly, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe she fainted. Maybe she had a panic attack. Maybe she had stepped outside and something happened. But deep inside, fear twisted in a way he could not shake. By the time his car turned onto the diner street, he saw something that made the fear turn into fury. Employees standing near the windows, looking anxious. Customers whispering. A hostess pacing by the door. The car hadn't even stopped when James pushed the door open and stepped out. People turned. They knew him. They knew he didn't show up anywhere without reason. He walked straight into the diner, his presence impossibly calm, but his eyes burning with concern. "Where is my wife?" he asked the hostess. The young girl jumped, startled. "Mr. Brooks, I'm so glad you're here." She went to the restroom, and then Harold. "What did he do?" James asked, his voice low but dangerous. He shut her in. He said she needed discipline. He blocked the door with something heavy. I tried to argue, but he told me to go back to work. James's jaw tightened until it ached. He turned slowly toward Harold, who was standing behind the counter pretending nothing was wrong. Harold's eyes widened the moment he realized who had just walked in. He cleared his throat, tugging nervously at his shirt collar. "Mr. Brooks. I didn't expect." "I don't care what you expected," James said. "Move." Harold stepped back, trembling. James walked toward the staff hallway, and a hush fell over the diner. Customers stopped eating. A few stood. One whispered, "Is she really in there?" Another said, "How could he do that to her?" Someone else said, "He better pray the mayor stays calm." At the end of the hallway, James saw the restroom door blocked by a crate stacked with heavy cleaning supplies. His heart burned. He shoved the crate aside with one hard push, grabbed the handle, and tried to open it. Locked. He knocked once. "Alana? Sweetheart. Are you inside?" There was a small pause. Then a weak, choked voice answered. "James?" The sound of her voice broke him. "I'm here," he said, his forehead resting against the door. "I'm right here." The lock clicked as he twisted it. The door opened slowly. There she was, sitting on the floor. Eyes red, face pale, her apron wrinkled, her hands trembling as she tried to stand. She froze when she saw him, her breath catching like a sob that refused to leave her throat. He knelt and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it felt like he was afraid she might disappear. She buried her face in his chest, finally letting herself cry. Her tears soaked his shirt, but he didn't care. He whispered, "I'm here. I'm right here. I've got you." Her fingers gripped his jacket like she was holding on to life itself. "I couldn't get out," she whispered. "I was scared. I didn't know what he was going to do. Cammy, my mom." James closed his eyes. "You're safe now. No one will ever do this to you again." The hallway was silent except for the sound of her crying. Employees stood further back, watching. Even they had never seen the mayor like this, quietly furious, yet tender, protective, and heartbreakingly human. When she finally pulled back, James brushed a stray curl from her cheek. "Can you stand?" "I think so," she whispered. He helped her slowly to her feet, holding her steady. Once she was upright, she looked toward the dining room, where dozens of eyes watched her with a mix of sympathy and outrage. Shame washed over her, but James squeezed her hand gently. "Don't look at them," he murmured. "Look at me." She met his eyes. For the first time since the morning, she felt safe. But safety wasn't the only thing waiting for her now. Justice was too. James turned toward the dining room, keeping one arm around his wife. His voice came out calm, but the entire room felt the storm behind it. "Which one of you thought you could treat my wife like she was less than human?" No one spoke. A fork clattered to the floor somewhere near booth 3. Harold stepped forward, stammering, "Sir, this isn't what you think." She was being difficult. She needed discipline. It was what? James asked. Reasonable? Professional? Or something else? Harold swallowed. She was disrespectful. By washing her hands, James said. The customers jerked their heads toward Harold. A few murmured angrily. James continued. "You locked her in a room. You blocked the door. You ignored her calls for help. That's not discipline. That's cruelty. And it ends today." Harold tried to respond, but James raised one hand, silencing him. "My wife is going home," James said. "And you will answer for this." Fully. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, coming fast. The hostess must have called them. Maybe more than one person did. Harold's face drained of color. Alana leaned against James, her voice still soft and shaken. "Can we go home now?" "Yes," he said gently. "We're leaving." As they walked toward the exit, customers began to stand. One woman said quietly, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Another whispered, "You didn't deserve any of this." A man added, "We're behind you." Alana felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they weren't from fear or humiliation. They were from the unexpected kindness in strangers' voices. When they stepped outside, the cool air wrapped around her like a gentle hand. James helped her into the car, kneeling beside her before closing the door. "I'm here," he whispered again. "And you're not facing this alone." She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." But as the police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing, she looked through the window at the diner behind them. A place she once depended on. A place that broke her today. A place she would rise above tomorrow. She didn't know what would happen next. Not yet. But one thing was certain. Her voice was no longer trapped behind a locked door. And the world was about to hear it. The ride home felt heavier than any silence Alana had ever known. She sat in the back seat beside James, leaning her head on his shoulder while the city lights rolled past the window like blurry stars. He held her hand the entire time, gently rubbing his thumb across her knuckles, grounding her with every touch. But even with his warmth beside her, she couldn't stop the tremble in her chest. Once, she drew a tiny bird sitting alone on a branch. Malik gently said, "Looks like it wants to fly but doesn't trust its wings yet." Lila looked at him with a softness that surprised him. Another day, she drew a lighthouse surrounded by waves. Malik murmured, "My mom says people are like lighthouses. Even broken ones can guide others." Lila stared at the drawing for a long moment after he left. Slowly, something invisible but powerful grew between them, a sense of safety. Sometimes, Lila left the bench and followed Malik around the garden, watching him work from a careful distance. She still never spoke, but her footsteps made a soft rhythm behind him, like she felt less alone in his presence. One afternoon, after finishing the walkway, he sat down on the grass, tired. Lila surprised him by sitting a few feet away. She placed her sketchbook on the ground, open to a drawing of a small boy and girl sitting under the willow tree. "You're really talented," he whispered. She didn't respond with words, but she turned the page and began drawing again, this time glancing at him every few seconds, sketching the faint shape of his profile. Meanwhile, inside the house, Charles Bennett watched from the window with a growing sense of confusion and hope. He had never seen Lila interact with anyone this way, not even her therapists. She kept everyone at a distance. But this boy, this kid in hand-me-down clothes, seemed to reach her without even trying. That evening, Charles asked Angela cautiously, "Who is the boy who comes with you?" She hesitated, unsure if revealing too much would risk her job. "He's my son, sir. Malik. And he talks to Lila?" Angela swallowed. "He doesn't force her. He just exists kindly near her." Charles looked down, emotion tightening his chest. "Do you think she likes him?" Angela gently replied, "Sir, I think she feels safe around him." That night, Charles stood outside Lila's door longer than usual. She sat on her bed, sketching the lighthouse again. He wanted so badly to speak, but he didn't know how. Instead, he whispered, "Good night, sweetheart," and closed the door softly. The next Saturday changed everything. Malik was clearing branches near the pond when he slipped on wet grass and twisted his ankle. He fell hard, wincing in pain. Lila, who had been sitting on the bench, immediately ran toward him, faster and more desperate than he had ever seen her move. She dropped to her knees beside him, her eyes wide, breaths shaky. Malik forced a smile. "I'm okay, just clumsy." But she shook her head, panic rising in her eyes. She touched his ankle gently, then looked toward the house as if debating whether to call for help. He whispered, "It's all right. Don't worry." But she couldn't stop worrying. Her hands trembled. Finally, she opened her mouth. A tiny breath escaped her lips, and then, like a fragile thread breaking free from years of silence, she whispered, "Malik." His heart stopped. He froze, staring at her as if the world had tilted. She had said his name. Her voice was raspy, soft, barely louder than the wind. But it was real. Did you just talk?" he whispered. She looked terrified, like she had broken a rule she wasn't sure existed anymore. Her lower lip trembled, and tears filled her eyes. Malik reached out gently. "It's okay. You can talk to me. I'm your friend." When he said, "friend," something inside her cracked open. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she leaned forward, burying her face in her hands. Malik, despite his own pain, wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "You're safe. I promise." From the mansion, Charles had been walking toward the garden when he saw the scene. He froze mid-step. His daughter, silent for nearly a decade, was crying in the arms of a poor boy, speaking his name. He didn't interrupt. He didn't breathe. He just watched, tears forming in his own eyes. Over the next few minutes, Lila clung to Malik like someone finally waking from a nightmare. She whispered small things, broken, halting words. "I didn't know how." "It's okay," he whispered. "I forgot what it felt like." He touched her hand gently. "You didn't forget. You were just waiting." Something profound happened that day. Not a miracle in the loud, dramatic sense, but a quiet, sacred one. Trauma began to loosen its grip from the corners of Lila's heart. When Charles finally approached, Lila stiffened. Malik squeezed her hand and whispered, "It's okay. He's your dad. He's been waiting for you." She lifted her face to her father, who was already sobbing. Charles dropped to his knees beside her. "Lila, sweetheart, I'm here," he choked out. "I've always been here." She stared at him, trembling, then whispered so softly he barely heard it. "Dad." He crumbled. Years of guilt, fear, and longing poured out in a cry he could no longer hold back. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her like he had wanted to for so long. Malik stepped back to give them space, tears burning behind his eyes. And Charles Bennett, billionaire, powerful business tycoon, the man the world feared, reached out and embraced the boy who saved his daughter's voice. "Thank you," Charles whispered into Malik's hair. "You gave me back my child." From that day on, everything changed. Lila asked for Malik often. She spoke in small bursts at first, whispering his name, asking tiny questions, or saying short sentences. Her voice was shaky but growing stronger. Therapy finally began working because she finally had hope. And Malik. He had no idea his presence had awakened something precious, not only in her, but in her grieving father too. But just when life began stitching itself back together, a storm more painful than the first was waiting for them. A storm that would test their bond, break their hearts, and force them to choose what love really means. With the winter approaching, work slowed down for Malik's mother. She struggled with bills again, and Malik noticed her coughing more at night. She brushed it off as exhaustion, but he could hear the strain in every breath. Meanwhile, Lila's recovery grew in small steps. She had begun speaking short sentences with Malik in the garden. She laughed for the first time in years, an airy, shy sound that made Malik grin every time he heard it. One afternoon, while sitting under the willow tree, she whispered, "You make the world quiet, safe." He blinked in surprise. "I just talk too much." She shook her head with a tiny smile. "No, you talk just enough." Charles began inviting Malik and Angela inside the house for cocoa after work. He wanted to know the boy who had done what 10 therapists couldn't. Malik tried to be polite, but he always felt underdressed, like he didn't belong in those marble hallways. Still, Charles treated him with unexpected warmth. One evening, Charles placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You're a remarkable young man." Malik shrugged softly. "I just didn't treat her like she was broken." Charles swallowed hard, realizing that was exactly what he had been doing for years. But the fragile peace that was forming didn't last long. In December, Angela collapsed at work. Malik's world shattered when the doctor entered the waiting room with a heavy expression. "Your mother has pneumonia. Severe. She needs intensive care." Hospital bills stacked up quickly. Malik watched helplessly as machines beeped around his mother's bed. She lay pale and exhausted, her breathing shallow. He held her hand and whispered, "Please don't leave us. We need you." She squeezed his fingers weakly. "Take care of your sister, and yourself." Tears ran down his cheeks. I'm trying. But I can't do this alone." The next morning, Malik showed up at the Bennett estate late, his eyes swollen from crying. When Lila saw him, she rushed over, panic filling her voice. "Malik, what happened?" His lips trembled before he could answer. "My mom, she's really sick." Without hesitation, Lila grabbed his hand. "Show me." They went to the bench, and Malik finally let the pain spill out. Lila listened, tears forming in her own eyes. Then something fierce awakened inside her. She stood, wiping her cheeks, and whispered, "Come with me." She led him into the mansion, straight to her father's study. Charles looked up from his paperwork as the two children entered. He saw the desperation on Malik's face, the determination in Lila's. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Lila stepped forward. "Dad, help them." Charles blinked, startled. Malik swallowed hard. "My mom's in the hospital. I don't know how we're going to pay." The boy lowered his eyes, ashamed to admit something so vulnerable in front of someone so wealthy. Charles stood slowly and walked toward him. He placed both hands on Malik's shoulders and said, "Take me to her." At the hospital, nurses whispered when Charles Bennett walked in, everyone recognizing the billionaire who rarely appeared in public. He asked to speak with the doctor privately. Minutes later, he returned with a firm look. "Your mother will get the best care," he said. "I've covered the expenses." Malik froze. "Sir, I can't let you." "You already saved my daughter's life," Charles replied. "Consider this a father's thanks." Malik broke down crying, overwhelmed by relief. Charles placed a comforting hand on his back. Lila wrapped her arms around him, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You're not alone, not anymore." The following weeks were filled with slow healing. Angela improved steadily with proper treatment. Her lungs grew stronger. Her fever lowered. The doctors told Malik with a smile, "She'll recover." When she finally woke fully, Malik sat beside her with Lila and Charles behind him. Angela whispered breathlessly, What are you all doing here?" Charles stepped forward, speaking with a softness she had never heard. "Your son saved my daughter. Now I'm returning the blessing." Angela cried, overwhelmed. "What you did for us, I can never repay," she whispered. "You already have," Charles replied. "You raised a boy with a heart strong enough to heal others." Malik looked down shyly, but Lila squeezed his hand firmly. Spring arrived, bringing new life to Westbrook. Lila's voice had grown steadier, stronger. She still wasn't talkative, but she spoke when she wanted to, especially with Malik. The willow tree became their sanctuary. They built a small birdhouse together, painting it bright yellow. When a tiny bluebird moved in, Lila whispered with awe, "It trusted us." Malik smiled. "Just like you trusted me." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You gave me back my voice," she said. "But more than that, you gave me back my courage." He looked at her, unsure what to say. So she stepped closer. "I want you in my life. Always." Malik swallowed hard. His chest tightened. "I'm not like you. I'm not from your world." She shook her head. "You're from my heart's world." In that moment, Charles stood quietly in the garden doorway, watching the two kids, one rich, one poor, building a friendship deeper than anything money could buy. His wife had always told him, "The heart doesn't see status, only kindness." Now he finally understood. The Bennett estate added a scholarship program in Lila's mother's name, for underprivileged children. Malik was its first recipient. Angela got a stable job in Charles's company with full benefits. Maya received tutoring and support. And Lila? She continued healing. She still had moments of silence, moments when grief crept back in. But she never walked those moments alone anymore. One evening, under a pink and gold sunset, Lila stood beneath the willow tree as Malik hung the last decoration on the birdhouse. She whispered, "Do you know why I spoke that day?" He shook his head. She took a breath, tears filling her eyes. "Because you said my name without expecting anything. You saw me, not as broken, but as alive." He stepped beside her. "You were always alive. Just quiet." She smiled softly. "Thank you, for giving me back my sound." He touched the birdhouse, watching the bluebird peek out. "We healed each other," he said quietly. "That's what friends do." Lila looked up at him with a tenderness that didn't need words. Her voice, once locked away behind grief, rose softly into the evening air. "You're my miracle, Malik." He felt his eyes sting. "And you're mine," he whispered. Under the willow tree, two kids from opposite sides of the world found a home, not in wealth, not in luxury, but in the fragile, beautiful connection that saves us when we need it most. And standing nearby, Charles Bennett wiped his eyes and whispered to the sky, "Thank you, for giving my daughter back."